Okay. Hello, and welcome to another Citizens Corner debate from Brussels, from the European Parliament. Our subject today, of course, the ongoing refugee crisis, and what are the solutions? How is Europe responding to this very big issue? With us in the panel today, we have Mario Lauristin, from Vice Chair of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. Hello to you.
Hello.
We have Ms. Skye Keller, Vice Chair for the Greens. Hello to you. Thank you for joining. We have Victor Bostinaru, if I'm pronouncing right.
Impeccably.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because I'm from Greece.
It's a surprise, but thank you very much.
You are, of course, with the Socialists and Democrats as well. We have Mr. Charles Goerens, who's with us as well from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats of Europe. We have Mr. Sergio Carrera. Hello to you, which is a Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Justice and Home Affairs Program. Here you are. Hello to you. And of course, we also have Mr. Pal Chaki. You are also with an MEP with the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats.
Sorry, EPP, European People's Party.
Oh, I'm so sorry. With the European People's Party,
Yeah.
of course. I don't want to mess up with those two big parties.
Part of my identity, so that's okay. That's okay.
Before we start the discussion, if I may open this subject with Ms. Eva Monsour, who's joining us from Warsaw. She's spokesperson at Frontex. Are you hearing us, Mrs. Monsour?
Yes, I am.
Hello.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Could you give us a bit the numbers and the operations of Frontex behind this whole thing we are calling since more than a year now, the big refugee crisis in Europe?
Yes, well, we know that 2015 was an exceptional year, and with over 1 million migrants coming to Europe and over 880,000 arriving in Greece alone. We also know that it was equally, as you called it at the beginning, a refugee crisis, because hundreds of thousands of those who came to Europe were and are seeking asylum. Whether migrants were coming by sea to Italy and to Greece, where Frontex had its operations, and these operations in the course of last year were tripled in size, in particular to increase the capacity for search and rescue, to add additional vessels which will be able to bring more migrants to safety. So we went from 5 to 15 vessels in Italy. We did the same in Greece. We, at the end of the year, of last year, we have saved over 160,000 people. This year, the situation is slightly different, with the numbers in Greece still high, but substantially dropping since March. But we are still at about 156,000 arrivals in Greece. And in Italy, by the end of winter, the numbers of migrants arriving from Libya and also from Egypt has gone up, and now they are reaching 50,000 arrivals. Again, search and rescue operations are ongoing there, but last year has shown that a lot more Frontex was needed. What I mean by that, we were deploying officers for registration, in particular in Greece, officers who were conducting interviews with migrants, who were taking fingerprints. By the end of the year, these teams were working 24 hours a day, because the numbers, as we all know, you are Greek, were enormous. I mean, the islands like Lesbos were experiencing sometimes 7,000 people arriving daily. So the challenges were great, but we've been deploying officers this year. As the numbers of arrivals in Greece have decreased, we are redeploying officers to Italy, where more support is needed at the moment. I don't want to run over time. I know you have a
Yes.
tight schedule.
Yes, we do.
So
we do.
maybe I'll stop
Thank
now.
you. Thank you for giving us this very vivid picture. I think it will give us a lot of food for thought, and it will open up a discussion that, of course, is ongoing, as I said in the beginning. Mrs. Lauristin, let me start from you. First of all, a reaction to these numbers. Was Europe ready for these numbers, and does it have now the tools to respond effectively to the migration crisis?
Well, I suppose that everybody have seen that Europe wasn't ready, and
Yes.
Europe wasn't ready, unfortunately, on different levels. People in Europe, in many countries, they really were not thinking about this kind of problems. They didn't know much about things going on in the faraway countries. They didn't have enough knowledge. And from other side, European institutions were not ready. European decision-making structure really wasn't meant to act in the situation of serious crisis. And for that, this refugee crisis really, I think, have been a very, very strong wake-up call for Europe. To look at the structures, to look at the agencies, to look at the opportunities which are given by existing treaties, but also to look at maybe some things which need rethinking and maybe even redecided, because the world is not this world with how it was when the European Union was created.
Since more though than a year now, Europe is trying to set up some schemes, some tools, adopt some tools in order to respond to it. We have the relocation scheme, we have the resettlement scheme. Recently, the Commission proposed new ways for cooperation with third countries. We have the blue card also that needs to be extended and to bring more people inside Europe in an effective way. Do you think we have the tools today, Ska Keller?
On the one hand, we had good tools in our hands already for a long time. We had the common European asylum system, but the main problem was that these tools weren't properly used. You could hardly find any member state that was implementing the directives and regulations correctly. And the Commission was not, for a long time, was not willing to really call the member states into action. I remember long talks we had the Commission about huge failures in member states, and the Commission would say, well, but we first have to have a dialogue with member states, and that's of course not outright wrong. Of course you have to first see together like how can you solve an issue, but when it's not solved for years, when you for example have no reception capacity, when you don't have an asylum system in place, then I think the Commission needs to act tougher. Because it's the task of the Commission to make sure that the member states are following the laws, and they did not do that. Now, since the start of the crisis, if you want to call it that way, I would say it's more a crisis of solidarity and a crisis of structures, indeed, rather than a crisis of arrivals. And we could have been prepared because we could have known that there was the war in Syria not ending and so on. But things that have happened since then are not going in the right direction from my point of view, because the whole policy of Commission, but also member states, well, let's say not the whole, but most of it is directed towards closing of the borders, to say it in a simple way. Yes, we have the relocation scheme. That was a very good...
but it's still in papers.
It's a very good attempt by the by the Commission. Unfortunately, not really followed through by member states. They're not willing to provide the places that they have to do, but still, it's a very good scheme. That could have been the start for a new relationship of solidarity, but unfortunately, that does not really work out. But now we have the Turkey deal. We have the migration compact, which now is somewhat called differently, which all means we're cooperating with third countries in order to stop refugees and migrants from coming. And this is a completely wrong approach. I mean, imagine we're telling countries like Lebanon, Libya, Ethiopia to house more refugees, and countries like Eritrea or Somalia to stop people from coming from there, even though there's very good reasons for why people would come from there. While those countries have actually taken much more refugees than we have. Lebanon, for example, has been taken more than 1 million refugees. Jordan, Turkey, Ethiopia, a lot of countries that are much poorer than the EU have taken more refugees than us. But now we say, look, we had too much. We're like 500 million Europeans. We're the richest continent. worldwide,
But
relatively
still,
seen, but you know, we can't take so many. 1 million is already too much on our 500 million inhabitants. I think this is the very wrong approach.
Mr. Goerens, a lot of people were saying that if the EU as a whole doesn't treat the external borders as European borders, we will not have a solution for the refugee crisis. What is your thought? And do you also agree with sanctions for the countries that do not respect the relocation scheme?
No, first of all, we do need a spirit of solidarity. When facing this kind of crisis. I am ashamed to see that a lot of member states do not accept to share a part of the burden. We should deal in a way that all the member states accept their part. We can, in order to achieve this goal, base our policy on two criteria: demographic criteria, and the second one based on prosperity, on the welfare of the state.
But
that's the first. Second, if member states do not accept to share the burden, your question was whether or not we should launch.
We've heard a lot of European officials saying that we should impose sanctions. Mr. Dijsselbloem referred to that recently also.
Yes, but Mr. Dijsselbloem didn't explain how to act in this way. We have adopted a multi-annual financial framework. The money is already allocated from 2014 to 2020. It's not realistic to conceive Mr. Dijsselbloem's proposal. It's simply not practicable.
Yeah. Well, so what is your thought? What should there be there? Should there be only a voluntary scheme that countries must follow if they want? It's up to their will.
Well, we have made the experience with the voluntary scheme. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Yeah, that's my question. So what would be your proposal?
My proposal is to wait until the 23rd of June. And after the referendum on the Brexit, we should have a serious discussion among the 27 or 28 remaining countries in order to conceive another way to have solidarity. This is not a crisis of the European Union. This is a crisis of the member states. They do not accept the limits of their action. Not a single member state can overcome this crisis alone. We have to act in the spirit of solidarity.
So, Mr. Palczaki, what's your opinion on that? Is it a crisis of Europe? Is it a crisis of countries alone?
If I may recommend you, it would be good to discuss this question in its complexity.
Okay.
So I think that's a global crisis. That's a crisis of the world, not only of Europe, and not only of the member countries. I think it's not necessary, it's not possible to solve this very complex issue only on the territory of the European Union, only by the activities of the European Union. So I think we need partners. We need partners also from the Arabic countries, and we need partners also from the side of the United States. That's really a global problem. Secondly, that's not a short-term problem. Don't forget, please, we are waiting for the longer process concerning this question. There are some critical situations in Asia regions, in Africa regions. So it will be continue in the future. So some protection of our external borders. That's maybe a necessary step now. But I think we must create an active, complex policy to the countries of Africa, to the countries in Asia, and again invite also some other players of the international position concerning this question.
So cooperation with third countries is in the right direction.
Yes, I welcome the new migration partnership framework, which was now produced by the European Commission. But I'm afraid we lost a lot of time last year and this year. And to push the solution only to the territory of the European Union, only to the maybe creation of some quotas, that's not a solution, and that's not a necessary solution of this question, because we don't know the final figure of these migrants. So that's a very, very complex issue. I'm very unhappy that from the point of view of the European Commission, we lost a lot of time. But on the other hand, I welcome.
And a loss of credibility.
Yeah, and that's it was also a problem, and maybe not very successful position of whole of European political elite, not only of the elite of the European Union or of the European Commission. So I hope now we are on a better way. I think that with the activities of European Commission, European Union, we have a chance to create a better position also generally for the future. And we have to see also that Europe has limited capacities for the solving of this problem. We see now we have seen a very positive position of Sweden, and we see now the request of the Sweden. So that's a mirror. Yeah. That's a mirror that we have limits in Europe. And I think philosophically is not a good plan for the future, that Europe cannot save these countries or these regions by simply taking over its citizens, millions of refugees and migrants. So we need these people, relatively well educated people, also in their regions, in their mother regions for the future. So I think that's maybe a complex question for the future.
Mr. Bashnaro, let me ask you the same question. Where do you think we are today? Is it are we in the role of solving this crisis? Have we adopted the tools? Has the European Parliament made the right proposals to go forward with the solution of this crisis? And then I would like to ask Mr. Carrera as well.
I see in a quite different way the role and the positioning of different bodies. I think that the Commission, under the pressure of the Parliament, did his very best in order to come up with proposals, sometime a bit too late, but do not forget the main reason for the delays were the Council. If it's to name someone...
So the states.
The member states which are so stubborn, so reticent, even in backing proposals, fair proposals made by the Commission. The second, in a completely divergent behavior of different member states, from the complete openness and very welcoming position like Germany to a blind opposition and rejection of any sort of relocation in the case of some others. Plus, to consider that by building up walls, fences, we can defend this citadella, it's completely wrong, because any individual response, any solution based on the one single member state's position, it's in the end a failing proposal. Nobody can survive such a crisis without practicing, not speaking about solidarity, practicing it. The second element I wanted to mention, all my colleagues were speaking about the need Europe to act in a proactive way in order to stabilize the regions from where the migrants, refugees are coming.
So cooperation with the third countries.
This is what Europe was doing recently. This is the very meaning of the migrant compact and migration compact, and this is what Europe should practice in a coordinated manner, putting together foreign policy, international humanitarian aid, development programs, in order to get more development locally, because by order, no one single human being will stay in that place if the conditions are not met. And finally, something which will happen quite soon, because let's be honest, Europe was unable to predict the developments. No one single strategical assessment about this crisis which will confront Europe. No one told us before. We knew that there is instability, there are violences in our surroundings, but no one major strategical assessment on the crisis as such. Now what Europe is doing is to build up its real response on the external border protection. Because I quote from Donald Tusk, the president of the Council, we cannot outsource our external borders. We cannot do it. We should build up equally external border control. This is what the Coast Guard and border control will be now developed. And I think this should be accompanied by one important point, to check who are the ones crossing our borders, who are the ones legitimate to get in and to be treated fairly. And the second, system of a sort of data bank with necessary security information, because the risk of security even is not that high. It's important to build up from the beginning such an entity with all capabilities, because what happens today when speaking about the intelligence sharing, it's so ineffective. There are few member states practicing properly intelligence sharing. Some others, those who were the most affected by terrorist attacks, are the less committed to practice intelligence sharing. And finally, what I'm suggesting in my proposals to my group strategical paper on migration, at the border control, the refugees, migrants to sign up a legal binding document which speaks about the need they to integrate it within our societies, within our system of values, within our legal constitutional systems, and not the opposite.
Yeah.
And if they will not do that...
So that's other tools that you are suggesting that could go in the way for finding a solution there.
Yes.
Mr. Carrera, let me give you also some space to talk here. And in your opinion, what's the most urgent thing that we as Europe and the European institutions, but perhaps even if you think that the solutions come from each state, what is the most urgent thing that we need to address today in this crisis, which is ongoing, obviously?
Well, thank you. I think the most urgent priority should be to stop this crisis-led policy making. Decisions are not taken on the basis of data, of facts, are based on the basis of fear, irrational politics. The Commission is not playing its role by presenting what is needed. I mean, the data tell us that these are mainly refugees. I mean, the people who were trying to enter Europe were asylum seekers in a majority of cases. And what the data tell us also is that the problem was the EU Dublin system. That system must be changed. And the recent recast proposal by the Commission doesn't deal with the challenge of changing it. It's basically putting a nice makeup, but continuing putting main responsibility to the member states of first entry, like Greece, when assessing asylum applications. It continues coercing asylum seekers to stay in those member states against their willingness. And it also continues living under the false presumption that EU member states can trust each other when it comes to fundamental rights protection. And the Commission knows that and deliberately decided not to address those issues. You were mentioning Donald Tusk. Donald Tusk said on TV, if you are a migrant, don't come to Europe. How can we pretend to live up to our values and principles with this kind of discourse and message? If Europe cannot provide international protection, as it should, to those people, why are we not doing the job? The cooperation with third countries is a wonderful example of the European Parliament being excluded from what the Commission is dealing secretly. The EU-Turkey deal is a wonderful example. Everyone talks about what is it? Is it a legal agreement? Is it a statement? Well, the whole point behind this is that it excludes the Parliament to democratically scrutinize that, the legality of that agreement. Similar with African countries. What the Commission wants to do is to conclude informal arrangements with those countries to readmit people. But what is the scrutiny? What is the legality of these arrangements?
So what you're saying basically that first of all the solution should be found inside the EU.
Absolutely.
First of all,
this is an internal issue.
And then there should be more shared burden.
Well, I wouldn't like to talk
countries.
about burden because it's not a burden. It shouldn't be a burden to receive.
You're right on that. Yeah.
You know, to receive those refugees. Clearly, you know, we really need to rethink fundamentally the EU Dublin system. It doesn't work. The Commission can set up this temporary relocation, which indeed, I mean, it was like 1,500 people relocated so far from the previous target that it was 150,000. people to be relocated. I mean, this is scandalous.
160,000.
160,000.
So only 1,500 have been so far relocated. Clearly it doesn't work. Why? Because people don't want to stay in Greece. People don't want to stay in Hungary. Why don't we allow those people to move wherever they want? We have a Schengen free movement area, right? People can move freely.
We have today
Of course,
Schengen.
of course. That's another point, by the way, that the Commission should have informed better what this crisis was all about. Schengen is not in crisis. All member states, the 5 member states, which continue reintroducing internal border checks, are doing that in accordance to the rules. Here also, European Parliament should call the Commission to better check the justifications given by those member states. But so far, they are complying with the rules. So Schengen is not in crisis. All this crisis is playing in the hands of the populist political parties like Le Pen. She's super happy about this.
Mrs. Lauristin, are the borders still open inside the European Union?
That,
Do you think there's still Schengen here?
everybody sees that borders are closing, and from other side we all see that our outer border is not, say, firm enough. But that's one question. But why borders are closing? Why people are against refugees? Why refugees themselves don't want to be resettled or relocated? Because there are countries who are expecting to have more refugees, but the refugees are not going to those countries. I suppose that there are a lot of issues which should be really properly also researched. What I feel there is a lack of the serious analysis. It's very easy to say, one says, oh, member states are guilty, they don't do enough. Others say, oh, Commission is guilty, they don't do enough. Third say, oh, refugees are guilty, they have to stay in own countries. Third says, oh, they're the outer countries guilty, they should do enough. But there is no proper, really, analysis. Why refugees, for example, who are stacked in Greece in inhuman conditions, why they don't agree, why they don't want to go to those countries which are under relocation scheme and are agreeing to receive them, but they don't want. So how we can achieve the goal without making people moved without their agreement.
Yeah.
So I suppose it is a kind of work we have to do. It is a kind of social work, consultancy, information work, communication, all this part of thing. Then when we speak about integration at first place means integration is the labor market. But there is a lot of problems in different countries where refugees cannot access to the labor market. So I suppose we have to look at that as a process and deal with that and solve the issue step by step, not looking for scapegoats.
We have a student, a German student from the University of Cluj in Romania here with us, Remy Almond. He wants to ask 3 questions, and then I would like, first of all, SKAI Keller to react to these questions. So the floor is yours.
My question would be regarding the refugee crisis and the debate about borders and closing borders, making borders more secure. Shouldn't also be a priority discussing the causes for people to flee their countries to seek refuge in Europe? Shouldn't also be this a priority of the discussion in this topic?
So again, cooperation with third countries, SKAI Keller. What's your reaction on that?
Absolutely, we have to look at why people are fleeing, and we have to do something about the reasons for why people have to flee, and not just close the borders. For example, now, if we look at Eritrea, that's a country where you basically have a dictator who's mistreating people. There's a lot of torture, forced labor, and all of that. So people have very good reasons why they're fleeing. Now, the cooperation that the EU wants to do with Eritrea is not about remedying the situation, but rather to close the border so that people cannot leave Eritrea. So they will still be treated horribly, but they can't leave the country anymore. And I think this is the wrong cooperation. The Commission also proposes, for example, when we talk about development cooperation, I think I would agree to also use development cooperation to stop reasons for why people have to leave. The problem is that the Commission proposes to rather use it as a sanction possibility. So if a country does not take back refugees and migrants, own citizens, but third country citizens as well, then you get cuts in your development support. You get even trade sanctions, which is something we never, we don't even have for human rights problems. So this is a big problem. It's not coherent at all. And there is also a myth around border security, really. Because if we're saying, okay, there's a lot of people coming here, we have to secure the border, that's not the issue. With securing the border, you're not stopping refugees from coming, because everyone who reaches your border has the right to ask for asylum. Now, whether the asylum gets granted or not, of course, it's a different issue, but you cannot turn someone away who's asking for asylum. And with regard to relocation, the main problem we have right now with relocation is about member states not offering places. It's not about people don't wanting to go somewhere or not, it's about member states not offering places. However, refugees have very good reasons for why they would prefer a specific state. For example, if you have family there, and under Dublin, we only recognize a very small core family. We don't, for example, accept that it's good for the integration of a refugee as well if a cousin lives in one place or the other. Or they want to go because they think they have the best labor market prospects there, which also makes sense because we don't want to put people somewhere where they're unemployed for the rest of their life. We want to give people a perspective so they can integrate. So it makes a lot of sense to take the interests of refugees into account when you relocate them. And member states also have to improve, because the reasons why no refugee currently wants to go to Hungary is because they're being mistreated in Hungary. That has to stop.
Okay. This is a big question also. Where is the limit between forcing something and let it happen because out of European solidarity? I would like to give the floor again to Mr. Rémi Almond, and I would like the reaction of Mr. Palchaki first and Charles Goerens after on his question, please.
Okay. As we already mentioned, like the involvement of third-party countries, I'd be interested in if the European Union really should rely on third-party countries such as Turkey or FYROM to help to control the stream of refugees coming towards Europe, even if it's not assured that these countries will fulfill their duty regarding the human rights or basic human needs. So if this is in question, doesn't the European Union have a moral duty concerning this?
So what's the moral duty of Europe, and does it address what we are expecting the European Union to give to the rest of the world? Mr. Chaki.
Yes, I think we need to realize a permanent dialogue with the third countries. I am happy that after a 14 months period, the European Commission changed his philosophy and now opened a discussion not only with Turkey but also prepared migration partnership framework. If you allow me, I have cited from the last year. We had a very good discussion last year in Strasbourg on this question, and Madame Mogherini said, we are ready to increase financial and operational support and to invest in long-term economic and social development, security, rule of law and human rights, improving people's lives and tackling the drivers of migration. So I think we need such a more complex position of the European Union, and we have to be very, very active. But that's also a very complex question in the area of the European Union. I would like to ask, dear friends, what about after? I fully agree with the position that we must be solid on the level of our real capacities. But there is here on the table, I take some here to the table, a terrible sentence which was said by Madam Chancellor Merkel, by President of French Republic, and by Prime Minister of Great Britain. We have no in the European Union a well-functioning model of living together with different cultures. There is not a well-functioning model in Germany. There is not a well-functioning system in France. There is not a well-functioning system in Great Britain.
So you're saying that this has a repercussion
What about after? What will be the follow-up steps? So I fully agree with you that we have to be solid there. But again, that's not only a responsibility of the Europe, and that all problems of the crisis regions
Okay.
in the world is not possible to solve only by migration.
Let me have a reaction by Mr. Goerens also, and let me also ask you something. If you can also comment on the treaty, the deal with Turkey. Is it going well? Could it continue? We're seeing some developments that are very negative, and we've seen also Mr. Juncker speaking in a very negative term with Mr. Erdogan lately, and the whole change of his ministers and the Prime Minister, of course.
Well, it's not very easy to speak in positive terms with Mr. Erdogan, seeing what he have done over the last weeks and months. He is no longer qualified for the access to the European Union. That's a matter of fact. Concerning our deal with Turkey, Commissions and the deal with Turkey, I am a little bit suspicious because on the one hand, Turkey has done a lot in order to welcome millions of refugees. 1/10 of new jobs are offered to people, to refugees living in Turkey. We must admit that as a positive result. Not all the European member states are acting in the same way. On the other hand, we must act in a way that Turkey and all the other states we are dealing with are doing that in a spirit of respect of the international agreements and conventions. Everything we are adopting in this kind of agreements must be fully in line with the provisions of the UN conventions, and it must be done under the auspices of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
We see that this is not exactly the case at the moment, Mr. Boştinaru, with Turkey. Where do you see all this going with the deal with Turkey? Because we see that for the moment this is the only solution that Europe has in its hands.
It is a dramatic dilemma because in one hand it's true Turkey it's an sine qua non factor in order to address the flow of refugees. Strategically, Europe does need Turkey for its global policies as a major leverage to communicate to the Muslim world and as a proof that Muslim and democracy can cooperate. On the other hand, what Erdogan is doing now, including the decision to practically dissolve the institution of parliamentary immunity for up to 150 MPs, it's not only unacceptable, it's unprecedented. Where some member states and the Commission did fail was to have a balanced dialogue with Turkey based on some conditionalities, which brings the need to pragmatically work for a solution on refugees, and in the same time to guarantee that some democracy is still functioning in Turkey. We cannot close our eyes or turn our eyes from Turkey just because cynically we would love Turkey to close its borders and to help us not to see any refugee. And I know very well that under the current conditions, the European Parliament will probably say no to the free visa regime for Turkey. And if so, I see as a Romanian that the Black Sea might be overcrowded this summer, because repeatedly Mr. Erdogan told he is ready to stop the agreement or completely to denounce it. This is why it would be much better for Europe to earlier engage Turkey, honestly, because some people would never love to discuss about integration with Turkey for religious and not only reasons. And secondly, chapters 23, 24 would be better to have it open up in order to discuss based on legal commitments what a country should do or what a country cannot do because its own legal commitment.
I'd like to close with Mr. Sergio Carrera. Do you think Europe is right at the moment to base the solution of this ongoing crisis on Turkey?
I mean, everyone knew. We had all the international actors, United Nations, Council of Europe, that the EU-Turkey deal was illegal. It does not comply with basic human rights obligations, and the European Commission decided to go ahead. So if we don't take those values and principles as our starting point, non-negotiable, there's no way we are going to find any solution for anyone. I think it's a very bad way to do policy.
But did Europe have a choice? Did the member
Of course.
states have a choice?
Sure,
At
there
the
are many
moment
choices.
they made the deal?
It's a political choice. It's a political choice, and the human rights issue, by cooperating with countries like Turkey in that way, the European Union is contributing in incapacity by those countries to comply with human rights. If the EU invests money in those countries to contain refugees, of course those countries will not respect human rights. Turkey will be in difficulty in the Council of Europe and the Strasbourg Court. Only courts will come. Now it seems that few cases have reached Luxembourg, basically asking for invalidating this agreement. And hopefully the courts will tell us finally. But it's very sad that we leave it to the courts. We will expect the European Commission to do its job, and
And the member states.
And the member states. But from the European Commission, you would expect guaranteeing the treaties.
Juncker was not supported by the member states. That's the very origin of the problem. SKAI can confirm that. We were attending the meeting when Juncker addressed the European Parliament. It was a very generous discourse, and he was fully applauded by the audience. But he was not supported by the member states.
I think we all agree, and because we don't have any more time, that I think all the panel agrees that the situation is very complex, that the solution is to be found on a European level, on a member state level, and in cooperation with third countries. I hope this is going to get into the right road in the months and years, hopefully not years, but months to come, in order to effectively respond to this ongoing crisis. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.